Greetings, paddle sports. I'm coming in to talk to Dave Dahm about cutting my brand new paddle to size. We're here to talk about sizing a paddle for sup surfing and sup foiling. We're going to cut a brand new paddle today, and we decided to hot glue it as opposed to epoxy, and we're going to talk about the advantages of both. So Dave, tell me about sup paddle length for sup surfing and sup foiling. Is there a guide for that?
You know, there is a guide. Most people cut their paddles somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 inches over their head. Some people go as high as 6 inches over their head. And sometimes it'll take 2 people to do that, wherein the second person will measure the paddle and mark it while you're standing there. And you got to make sure to not wear shoes, stand barefoot, have someone accurately measure your height, and then determine how high you want to go. So 4 to 6 inches, and that depends entirely on your height. A lot of people will want the paddle to come up flush with the palm of their hand for touring, and for surfing, quite often people will go flush with their head.
I am a sup surfer, but I'm transitioning into sup foiling. And is there a need to get a different length paddle if you're foiling? You know, I'm already surfing, but when I go to foiling, do I need to get a taller paddle, bigger paddles, whatever? Any difference?
That's a good question. You really don't need to lengthen your paddle. Everything that has gone on in the past applies to the present. If you're standing on the board paddling out right now using a paddle that's 2 to 4 over your head, it's going to work just fine for foiling out through the water.
So good news is I just need a new paddle because this one's finally worn out.
I know you're pretty attached to that.
I know, I love this paddle here. So we're going to cut a brand new quick blade paddle. Dave, tell us, how do we do that?
Okay, so Roy, this last paddle is 72 inches to the top of the handle, and it could be any length that you choose for your height, but in this case we're duplicating your old paddle. So the first thing I do is I attach the tape measure to the end of the new paddle, and I put a mark at 72 inches. Now I need to deduct a certain amount to span the distance from the bottom of the handle portion and the top of the handle portion. This is the stem down here that glues in to the end of the paddle shaft once we cut it. So I need to take that, measures from the top of the paddle handle to the base. It's 2 3/4 of an inch. So I put a second mark at 2 3/4 down from our desired 72 inches, and that's at 69 1/4 inches. And as a check, I'll place the handle up here and visually verify that this cut line will accommodate our handle. So the next step is to cut this off.
So Dave, hot glue versus epoxy, is one better than the other for the sup surfer, sup foiler, just a basic paddler?
Yeah, right, good question. Each have their advantages. If we use an epoxy versus hot melt, you're going to gain strength with the epoxy. The epoxy is much stronger than hot melt glue. It takes longer to dry. It takes anywhere from, in this case, 20 minutes. It's a 5-minute epoxy. It sets in 5 minutes, but it doesn't achieve its maximum strength for at least 2 hours, if not overnight. And the nice thing about the epoxy is the strength that it has. The negative to the epoxy, the con if you will, is that once you glue your handle in there, it's there permanently. The only way to remove it is to heat it rather aggressively and hope to break loose the bond. And at that point you can then shorten the length of the shaft if you want. The beauty of hot melt is it's really fast, and you can be in the water in 5 minutes, and it does form a nice waterproof bond. The downside of it is that it is not as strong as the epoxy, and so if you twist on it real aggressively, you can break that loose. Now I'm using a paddle right now with a a hot melt handle in it. And the reason for that is I didn't know that 2 inches over my head was going to be exactly right. I had in the back of my mind the idea of cutting it maybe a little bit shorter. So I initially cut it at that 2-inch, hot melt glued it, and it gives me the opportunity to warm it up with a hot air gun and slide the handle out and then shorten it if I want. Okay, I'm going to put a bead of hot melt glue around the base here, and I'm going to put some around the top as well. And the trick to this is getting it on there before it starts setting up, and so I'm going to shove it inside the shaft here and set my glue gun down, get it lined up on here, and we can wipe the hot melt. And here's a real challenging part, to get it so that the handle is running parallel with the blade before the hot melt cures. So quite often I'll put a pencil line on both the shaft and on the handle before we actually glue it. That gives me a little bit of a target. And I've done this a number of times before, and so I'm able to get it right out of the chute. So that takes a little bit of time to kick off there, to cure, and it's just temperature sensitive. But for all intents and purposes, it's dry now. It won't twist. It's ready to go in the water. That simple. If we were to have used epoxy, we would have used the same technique. Only we would have put the epoxy on there, slid it together, and we would then have anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to adjust the angle. But typically it only takes a few seconds to get the handle running perfectly true with the blade.
So thank you, Dave Dahlm, for showing us how to hot glue a paddle. We appreciate the tutorial today, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact Dave at King's Paddle Sports in Carlsbad, California.
Thanks for watching. Enjoy your paddle.